Hi, I'm Simon Hurley, a 14-year-old card maker, and I'm super excited to be showing you guys how to be a little bit more frugal with your money and keep the supplies you have to create cards you really love. You guys will have some cards you'll be able to send out and be super proud of after you're done taking this, and I'm super excited to share this, so let's get started. Alright, so we've already pre-cut and scored all the pieces of cardstock that we're using today. So this is just going to be a piece for stamping all the little images down on the card, and then we'll be cutting them out later with the die cutting machine. This is a special piece of watercolor cardstock, so it'll accept the watercolors a lot nicer, and that's what we used for the background on this card. And then we have two top folding card bases. These are 4 1/4 by 5.5 inches, and then we've scored them down so that they're top folding. And then last but not least, we just have another piece of cardstock we can use to cut out the sentiments and stamp on for the little birds as well. So let's get started. So we're going to start off by using the watercolor cardstock, and this has a little bit of a texture in it, so it's going to be a little bit harder to stamp on, but it'll create a really awesome background and accept the paints a lot nicer. So I'm going to start off by pulling out our stamp set. We're using the Tweet Tweet set by Avriel, and I just love all these little birds. So we're just going to pull each one off and just add it onto an acrylic block. And you're going to want several of these for your stamping today, so that we can have all the images out at one time and you won't be having to get your fingers dirty by pulling off the stamps and replacing them. And if you'd like to, you can also have several images on one block by just flipping it over. So we're going to just flip this over and have 2 of the leaves and 2 of the flowers together as well, and we can just put this stamp together as a smaller one to fill in some of the gaps. And then I'm just going to add this and our little bird. For all of our stamping today, we're going to be using archival ink, and this will give us a nice solid image, and it'll be waterproof, so nothing will bleed when we add our watercolors. So I'm just going to start off with one of the birds here. Just ink it up, and then you can stamp it right down onto your cardstock. And just make sure you give some nice pressure because that watercolor cardstock is a little bit harder to stamp on. Then I'm just going to stamp down the image that we put together of those little flowers. And you can always put together the really small images in the stamp set. And this will create kind of a filler image. That way, if no bird will fit in a little gap, that image will. So you just kind of have to fit these together like a puzzle piece, and it'll look kind of like a pattern paper once you're finished, which I think is really cool, and then we'll fill it in with the watercolors. So just continue stamping these down, and don't be afraid to stamp one down upside down if that's how it fits, because I think it looks pretty cool when they're going all in different directions. So now we're going to move on to starting our watercolor, and we're using the Ganze Tandy watercolors. So these are really creamy and bright watercolors, and these are super easy to use on your cards. You just have to add the color right down, kind of where you want the darker area, and then just kind of spread it out throughout the whole image, and you'll get a really fun watercolor look. And you can use the same colors on all the different birds. I like to keep the same color going throughout on the same bird and then switch it up for each one. That way you kind of have the same color scheme going throughout the whole thing. And since these are some tropical birds, I picked some nice bright oranges and reds, blues and greens to kind of go throughout the whole thing. And that just kind of keeps the color scheme going and keeps those real bright colors in here. But you can use whatever colors you fit best. So in between each color, I'm just using a water brush. You just wipe it off until it goes right back to the clear water. And I love how bright these colors are from the set, and they'll dry mostly that way as well. As you continue painting this, you can finish up all the birds, and once you're done with that, you're going to want to make sure this is nice and dry before moving on to painting the background so none of the colors bleed. So we're going to just be heating this up with our heat tool. So I'm just bringing an acrylic black out now, and this will help us just transfer our paint onto here so we can have a nice concentration throughout the whole background. So I'm just grabbing the color that I want to use, and I'm just going to add it onto the acrylic block, as much as I'll need for the whole background, and then you can keep this same concentrated color and nothing will look different throughout your whole wash. So you can just go up right next to the birds, or you can leave a little border around your background as well. Just paint it in however you would like. I'm just keeping a nice flat wash here and not really adding too much variation throughout the color. And I'm butting it up right next to the birds. You could also leave the background just white as it was, but I find that adding this color is just a little bit more of a contrast, adding a neutral color in there, but you can definitely leave it stark white and that would create a really fun card as well. So I'm just going to finish up painting this entire background and I'll be right back after it's finished. So now that we're finished with our background here, we can now move on to the rest of our card and finish it off. Now we'll move on to stamping our sentiment. I'm just grabbing a little piece of cardstock here, and we're just going to stamp our sentiment in the corner and then cut it out. So we're going to use the sentiment that says, "A little birdie told me it's your birthday," which I just love. And I'm going to make sure it's nice and lined up for this because we're going to cut it out just as a square right in the corner. So I'm just using some archival ink so we can get a nice dark impression. And then I'm going to stamp it down right in the corner. After that's finished, we'll put away our ink and we're going to cut this out. I'm just going to cut a little square around here, just using my scissors and making sure there's a nice outline around there. So once that's all cut out, we can add it onto our card and finish off. So to add our sentiment to our card, we're just going to use a little bit of this foam tape and just rip a little piece off for the sentiment. And then peel off the backing. And we can add it right onto the back. And then add it onto the center of your card, making sure it's nice and lined up. So once we're finished with this, we're going to add it right onto our card base. So I'm going to do this using some foam tape just to pop it up a little bit and add some dimension. So I'm just ripping off a little bit of foam tape there, peeling off the backing, and we're just going to add some in all the corners of the card to make sure it's nice and sturdy on there. And then we're adding a little bit to the center too to make sure it stands up nice and tall in there too. And after we're done with that, we're going to add it right onto our card base, push down to make sure it's all adhered in place. And that's the finished card for today. So now we're going to move on to the second card we're creating. This one is going to just be a couple of the little birds perched on the little pole that's in the stamp set as well, and I think this one is super awesome. So to get started, we're going to stamp all of our images. I have this longer piece of cardstock, no certain size or anything, just so we can be able to die cut them in the end, so there's a little bit of room in between each image. So we're going to stamp all these down using archival jet black ink, so we have a nice crisp black image. And these work nice with the colored pencils that we're using as well. So just stamp them down. There's no specific order because we're going to be using the die cuts on these in just a little bit. So just ink the images up and then just give them a nice pressure and stamp them down. So I'm using 3 of the different little birds here. I'm using the tall one with the longer beak and the 2 shorter ones. I found that those were the best ones that fit on this big bowl here, but you can use whatever the birds you wanted. After that's all stamped, we're just going to be coloring the images in. So I'm using some different greens, blues, and purples. Like the other card, we're using some more exotic colors here, but anything would definitely work. So you can go pastel or neutral if you would like to. So I'm just going to pull out some of the colors and start coloring these little images in. So I'm just adding some shading and depth and dimension where the head meets the wings of the bird and also kind of around the lines that the company's provided. That's just what you want to make it a little bit darker there, and then we'll be able to shade and blend those in. And the fun part about colored pencils is you don't really need to have the same color family or anything. You can really bring in whatever kind of vibrant colors you want and mix them together to get a really fun blend. So here you'll see I'm just mixing in the orange with the red color, and then we'll get a fun blend on the beak as well. So once the coloring is all finished, we're gonna move on to die cutting these 3 images out, and then we'll move on to the rest of the card and building the rest of the scene. So I've placed all my images and put some washi tape on the dies on the outside and the paper. That way they'll be sit in place and it'll be really nice to cut these out. So I'm just adding my top plate on and we'll be running it through the die cutting machine. And once you're done, you can just pop all your different images out and they should be readily cut out, and they should have a nice white border around them as well. So next we're going to be stamping the background on our card, and this is just going to be this big pole here, this little kind of tiki hut. And so we'll be lining it up here. And you'll notice this part is a little bit thinner and so it's a little wobbly. I'm just going to grab this and make sure that it's nice and lined up by taking the top part of the image and pulling that up. And hopefully that's nice and aligned at the bottom, but it doesn't need to be super perfect. And then you can even line it up with your grid lines as well, and then push down, and we'll be able to stamp that. So we're just going to use the archival jet black ink again, because it'll give us a nice crisp image, and we can color this in with colored pencils. So I'm just going to ink this all up, and we can really easily just stamp it down using our acrylic black. So once that's all stamped down, we can just really quickly color this in. I'm just going to use a variety of different brown shades and neutral colors, but you can create whatever you want with this. You can even color the top of the hut with a bunch of different bright colors, but I just wanted to keep it really simple. So I'm just adding some shading underneath each one of these lines, and we'll blend that out in the end. You can kind of go pretty quickly with this and give it some texture too, because there might be hay or straw on the top of there as well. So next I'm coming in with my lighter color, and I'm just going to be blending all of that out. And we're just going to quickly go through this again. And it helps to blend the color if you're going in small circular motions and going with kind of a light hand as well, because you can always darken the color in the end if you're not happy with the result, but it's hard to lighten it up. Once that's all finished, we can then stamp our little sentiment right here. So I'm just going to grab the little sentiment that says, "A little birdie told me," the same one we used for the other card. And then we're going to stamp it down onto our card. And I did it at a little bit of an angle to follow along with that kind of branch that the bird is going to be sitting on. So once you've stamped the sentiment, it's time to put everything together and we can add the little birds onto our card. So I'm using some foam tape once again. This will just add a bunch of dimension to the card, and it'll be really easy to pop all these little birds up. So I'm going to use some scissors and just cut this foam tape in half, because these little birds are pretty small, and so the foam tape is really thick and it will show from behind those, so we're just cutting it right in half. So once we're done with that, I'm going to be adding the little birds on. I'm just going to take some of the foam tape and rip it off, and just place it under some of the parts of the bird so that it has some nice support underneath it. So once you're done with that, you can add it right onto your card, just sitting on one of those little branches. And I'm doing the same with the other 2 birds as well. Just going to add a little bit of foam tape to them and stick them right down onto the cards. So once you're done with that, your card is basically finished. You can definitely add some Wink of Stella if you want to on the little birds. So you could add it in little places like their little spots or their little wings and things like that, just to embellish it a little bit. And once you're finished with that, you can be done with the card and you're basically finished. Thanks so much for watching today, guys. I hope you really enjoyed learning a little bit more about using the supplies you have to create really awesome works of art that you're excited to send out in the mail. I hope to see you guys very soon for another lesson, and until next time, you can post your projects in the gallery and I would love to see them.